It's really more of a thriller than a horror per se, but obviously the premise would be horrifying if it were real life. Hello. There's been a change of plans. A couple of months ago, I did a review on the novella Rage by Stephen King under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. I have this copy of the Bachman books, which includes Rage, The Long Walk, Roadwork, and The Running Man. Out of all of those stories, the only one I was really familiar with at all was Rage. My original plan was to read the other stories and put them all into one video. I started off reading The Running Man, and I quickly realized that there was a lot to unpack, and I really felt like it deserved its own video. In all likelihood, the other two stories will also get their own videos. There is an introduction by Stephen King. In that introduction, he speaks about why he wrote under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. Something that I thought was really interesting is that he states in it that he thinks out of all of the stories he wrote under Bachman, he suspected that The Running Man was the best because it's all story, as opposed to Rage or The Long Walk, which he described as having windy psychological preachments in it. He also stated that he wrote it in about 72 hours and that there were very minimal changes before it went to print. I thought that was really interesting when I started reading it because I felt like there was so much to unpack. I felt like there was so much more than just story. Not necessarily that I thought it was preachy by any means, but it felt like there was a lot of commentary on a lot of different topics in the story. But who am I to disagree with the author? It's a common sentiment that I don't think very many people would disagree with, that art is subjective. However, it does feel a little strange to be arguing with the author about their own work. So I don't know. So according to this book, it says that The Running Man was written in 1982 and the introduction of Why I Was Bachman is from 1985. So even the introduction is quite old at this point. That would be 20, 30, 40, almost 40 years old. Yeah, so I wonder if his perspective on that would change now as far as how he looks at it looking back. It's hard to argue with his intention while he wrote it, but I guess I can just speak as to when I read the story, what my thoughts were on it. Sometimes things are greater than the sum of their parts, right? Even if there's things there that maybe wasn't intentional, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there. Let's get into the actual story. The Running Man is supposed to take place around this time period. So when he wrote it, he was looking to the future. Dystopian, I guess. Our main character is named Ben Richards. Ben is married to a woman named Sheila, and they have a child named Kathy. And they are living in a world where there's this thing called Freevee, and basically it's a channel that they have on their television where you have all these different programs. It's kind of like reality TV where people go on to try to win money, but it's a very dark dystopian version of that. One of the examples was called Treadmill to Bucks, and they specifically only bring contestants onto the show who have severe medical conditions, lung issues, heart issues, and they force them, they volunteer to be on the show. But again, these people have severe medical conditions who desperately need money, and so they go on these shows and they have them run on a treadmill. The longer they last, the more money they earn. They also get asked questions intermediately while they're on the treadmill, and if they get the questions wrong, then they lose a bunch of money that they had started to accumulate. And so oftentimes these people will have a heart attack or something like that will happen. But, that's entertainment for you. These types of programs are obviously designed for people who are very, very desperate. Because if you weren't, why would you go on a show like this to get money where you're risking your health or your life? It feels very gross. Ben and Sheila have a daughter named Kathy who is very young and very sick. She has pneumonia, and they can't afford to get her the medication that she needs to get better, get her the medical attention she needs. It gets to a point where he feels desperate enough and he goes to apply to be on Freevee. When contestants go, they don't know which show they will be chosen for. If they think they're a good candidate, they will decide which show. And Ben does get selected. However, he gets selected for The Running Man. And The Running Man is basically a show where people are trying to hunt you down and kill you. But if you can last an entire month without getting caught by these hunters, then you get $1 billion. No one's gonna get $1 billion. numbers, right? Like nobody has ever won the show. So basically it's a death sentence. But what you're doing is for every hour that you survive, you're earning money. His intention, for anyone's intention being on the show, is that they will earn money for their families. And all of this is being broadcasted on TV for people to watch and enjoy. And people are rooting against you. They're trying to make it interesting for viewers. So they're kind of framing these people as being bad guys in one way or another. They're incentivizing them to retaliate against police because if they kill police, then they get financial bonuses. But then when they actually do act out violently against police officers, the television network uses that against them to get public opinion turned against them. Like, oh, look what this terrible man did, even though they're the ones who financially incentivized them in the first place. Not to mention the fact that the hunters are trying to kill them. So it's literally in self-defense. That's kind of what the book is you are following Ben as he is participating in the Running Man. I have to admit that I have not seen Squid Games. I have not read The Hunger Games. I did watch the first movie, but I just didn't really connect with it. So I don't really remember. I never saw the other movies. I don't remember the first one at all. My understanding of what Squid Games is about and what I vaguely remember about Hunger Games, it's the same type of dystopian idea where people are literally fighting for survival for the sake of entertaining other people. So unfortunately, I cannot really make a valid comparison to those things, but my understanding is that it's a similar theme or idea behind it. What sort of commentary are we possibly touching on in this book? Well, class. I don't really see how you would not make that sort of observation reading this story. The clear distinction between the people who are desperate enough to try to be on a show like this and the people who watch the show, who demonize the people who would go onto the show, blaming them for being lazy. If they just would get a regular job, then they wouldn't need to go on a show like this. He can't just hunker down for 30 days. He has to constantly move because he's constantly being hunted. So if somebody sees him in public, they'll call the number to try to get him caught. They're not rooting for him in general. It shows a very clear distinction between the way the more comfortable, wealthy people view themselves versus the poor people. There really is a level of obtuseness. They do not recognize people sometimes just fall on bad luck or have rough circumstances. When you don't know that kind of struggle, how you can be under the misimpression that you are deserving of everything you have and people who don't have the things you do are not deserving. Something else I thought was interesting, which Stephen King often does have characters in his books that are racist, that use racial slurs. I wasn't sure at first if it was just a random choice to make our main character using a lot of racial slurs. He also uses a homophobic slur. Our main character is not this perfect person. At one point, he even refers to a black man that he looks like he came out of a minstrel show. So if you don't know what that was, because I didn't, I had to look it up. That is an old show from back in the day where white people did blackface. I guess they would occasionally have black performers, but for the most part, it was white people in blackface, just mocking, and that was the whole premise of the show because entertainment, I guess. So referring to an actual black man as looking like he came out of a minstrel show, insinuating that he looks like a caricature of himself, I guess, that he looks like a white person pretending to be a black person. Stuff like that. But it's not just our main character. It seems like a lot of the characters in the book were using racial slurs or were just blatantly racist in other ways. I didn't know if it was meant to just showcase that even in the future, prejudice is a very real thing. But I also know Stephen King oftentimes does just include racist characters in his books. So I that's one of the things I'm not really sure had much intention behind it. It could have just been a random choice. I'm really not sure. I noticed that our main character is the type of racist where he accepts help from a black man in this book, and during that time he does not use any racial slurs against him. If he is not engaging with a black person who is helping him, if he doesn't like you, or if he's just talking to someone else, then he lets him loose. His moral compass is very all over the place. He is very adamant that he would never cheat on his wife. He says he won't essay a woman woman because he's married. Very interesting moral guideline that is questionable and inconsistent at best. He receives help from numerous people along the way. Some of those people are completely aware of what is happening and are eager to help him. Some people help him because they do not realize who he is and he's able to bamboozle them. Other people are helping him against their will. It is quite a smorgasbord of, oh my god, I said that right the first time. Holy shit. Something else he points out when he is applying to be on the show in the first place, the neighborhood that he lives in is very poor. There's a lot of crime. The police really don't venture into his neighborhood very much. That very clear distinction between the area he lives in, and then he goes to apply to be on this show, and the building that they go to is littered with police officers. And they have to do all of these medical tests, trying to ensure that people have the health that they want them to have for whatever show they're going to be on. And so that distinction of there's all these resources available for something that's purely meant for entertainment and none available where it's actually needed. This shouldn't matter more. Why does it feel like it's being treated like it matters more? It's more complicated than that. The book really doesn't get preachy about any of this. All of this stuff is just happening. It's hard not to analyze the situations for what they are and what they represent and the eerie similarities to certain aspects of what goes on today. We have shows like Survivor and stuff like that, but it's nothing where the intention is ever to cause someone harm, to maybe scare them or to see extreme circumstances, but it's never full-blown murder or assault. There's always medical care available if somebody gets hurt on one of those shows and stuff like that. There's other things that it reminded me of. The startling lack of compassion is something that I think we do see today. Not everywhere. It made me think of YouTube videos where you see someone who's lived a very comfortable life shoving a camera into a homeless person's face as they give them food or something and don't realize how incredibly cruel that is. Well, it's for their YouTube video and they're giving food, they're doing a good thing. It might inspire other people to do a good thing. And they don't see how humiliating and cruel they're actually being. And that sort of level of obliviousness, I think, is reminiscent of the type of thing that you see in this book. Real life so often is really not interesting enough for people, which is why even reality TV needs to be so heavily scripted, because most people are simply not that interesting. And I think too, something that is also touched on in the book is how your perspective changes once you realize that you're playing a part in something. When they feel like the blood might be on their hands, it's not fun anymore if they have to feel bad. You justify it in your mind that these are people who are agreeing to do this thing. You ignore the carrot that they're dangling in front of people. It makes it easier to disregard their pain and their suffering because they signed up for this. They knew what they were getting into. Will admit I am not great at predicting endings to movies or books. I really enjoyed the ending. I found the whole thing very satisfying to read. I do think it can be a challenge to write a story where you're primarily focusing on one character and to make a compelling, enjoyable story even if that one character isn't particularly likable. He just feels like a complex, realistic person. I guess that's the thing. He thought this was the best because it's nothing but story. I think that that's not necessarily something I disagree with, but I do think that there is an underlying story there as well that I found really enjoyable to pick apart while I was reading it. I'm curious to read these other stories, The Long Walk and Road Work, to see if I also agree that The Running Man is his best from the Bachman era. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. Questions intermediately. They also get